Thanks, everybody. We come to this event with a genuine sense of urgency, no? Yesterday's events in Libya and Egypt point to what's really at stake, namely that we need to be respectful of other religious traditions at the same time that we unequivocally proclaim that violence in the name of religion, is the ultimate oxymoron. Back in March of this year, I penned a column for our own Catholic New York entitled, "Violence Against Christians on the Rise." I wish I could say that the situation has gotten better since then. It hasn't. According to the International Society for Human Rights, 150,000 Christians are killed for their faith each year, meaning we have 17 new martyrs every hour of every day. This promising gathering of bishops, religious leaders, policy analysts, academics, public officials, media professionals, people of goodwill, one and all, highlights the need to defend vigorously religious freedom throughout the world. Americans are shocked when they read headlines of attacks on innocent people of faith in faraway places, but too often those images of pain fade, and with it the need for concerted action. As Secretary of State Clinton observed only 10 weeks ago, more than 1 billion people live under governments that systematically suppress religious freedom. Members of faith communities long under pressure report that it's rising. Even some countries that are making progress on expanding political freedom are frozen when it comes to religious freedom. Well, I sure echo Bishop Pates's gratitude to everyone who's made today's conference possible. The Catholic University of America for hosting this conference, Catholic Relief Services for co-sponsoring this event. Thanks, President Garvey and Dr. Wu. Thank you as well, Bishop Pates. You're a distinguished chair of our acclaimed Bishops' Committee on International Justice and Peace, and you've ably continued and even intensified that committee's long-standing work to defend people of all religious faiths wherever their freedom, rights, and lives might be threatened. My gratitude also extends to my brother bishops who are here in such large number. We just completed the meeting of our administrative board, so I'm grateful for their company. Your presence in such large numbers is a sign of the critical importance of this issue to our conference. Can any of us, brother bishops, forget? Remember last June in Atlanta at our meeting? Can any of us forget the lumps in our throats and the moisture in our eyes when Bishop Shleiman Warduni of Iraq implored us not to forget our Christians in his homeland? Remember his plea? We beg you to help. All we want is peace, security, and freedom. Please, no more death, no more explosions, no more injustice. We're blessed this afternoon with a promising program featuring many expert presenters. Archbishop Francis Hillikat, the Apostolic Nuncio and Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the United Nations. Archbishop Silvano Tomasi, the Apostolic Nuncio and Permanent Observer of the Holy See in the United Nations at Geneva. Archbishop John Inayakin of Abuja, Nigeria, who came a great distance to share the painful persecution of the church in Nigeria with us, and the company of our own beloved Nuncio, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. Now today, our focus is on threats to international religious freedom, but as you're well aware, there are serious challenges to religious freedom within our own nation. Serious problems the church faces in her life and mission here in the United States. Threats that might marginalize the church and her educational, charitable, and healthcare institutions. But as grave as these challenges remain, and as indefatigable as we will remain in opposing and confronting them, they're of a different ardor than those faced by Christians and other people of faith in so many countries around the world. In the words of Archbishop Dominique Mamberti, the Secretary for Relations with States of the Holy See, of course, nobody would confuse or equate this marginalization of religion with the actual persecution and killing of Christians in other areas of the world. You know what? Not only is it morally imperative, consonant with the urgent gospel demands of justice and charity, for us as Catholics to be prophetic leaders in defending our co-religionists around the world who are today being thrown to the lions, but it is strategically necessary, as our own laudable efforts to defend our first and most cherished freedom here at home will be hollow and hypocritical if not coupled with a ringing solicitude for those under more overtly violent attack throughout the world. In all our deliberations here this afternoon, we got to remember that the absence of religious freedom in countries around the world leads to immense human suffering. We hold in our hearts images of bloodied bodies lying lifeless amidst the rubble of bombed houses of worship and the anguished faces of family members mourning their loss. We remember those anxious looks of refugees leaving behind homes and livelihoods as they flee religious discrimination or outright persecution. My hope is that we will together find ways to build societies respectful of the religious freedom of all persons and communities, a freedom at the foundation of all the others, a freedom we Americans of all creeds or none at all rise to defend at home and abroad. That column in March that I referred to a little earlier was prompted by a Catholic news service headline that was depressing, but all too familiar. Car bomb explodes outside Nigerian church. 10 die in the blast and violence. This assault, which occurred at St. Finbarr's Catholic Church, followed a similar attack only 2 weeks before at the Church of Christ compound, which killed 3 people and wounded 38 others, and Christmas Day attacks that saw more than 32 martyred for their faith at Catholic churches as they gathered to celebrate the Nativity of the Prince of Peace. I was especially saddened by this report because the Archbishop of Jos, Nigeria, where this violence happened, Ignatius Kayagama, the president of the Nigerian Bishops' Conference, happens to be a cherished friend of mine. He's one of the gentlest, wisest, most conciliatory men I know, and has been a bold leader in calling for calm, for nonviolence and religious freedom for everybody in Nigeria. In my frequent calls and communications with Ignatius, I can't fail but sense his deep anxiety as he daily watches his Catholic flock under attack and his own life in peril. But it's not just happening in Nigeria. Christians are being persecuted and killed at an alarming rate in many Muslim-majority nations. The 2012 annual report of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom notes, for instance, that in Egypt there is a climate of impunity in the face of repeated attacks against Coptic Christians and their churches. In Eritrea, there are an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 religious prisoners and reports of torture and other inhumane treatment of these prisoners. In Iran, the theocratic government has targeted Baha'is as well as Christians, Zoroastrians, and Sufi Muslims. You've heard of Pastor Youssef Nardakani, a Christian convert, sentenced to death for holding on to his faith, although I'm heartened to read Nina Shea's recent report that he's been freed. I can only begin to imagine the agony that caused his wife, his 2 young sons, and his flock, and the fear it's spreading among other Christians and religious minorities in Iran. This violence and persecution is leading to a massive exodus of Christians from the Middle East. Thousands upon thousands are leaving, usually forced out of countries where Christianity hasn't only flourished, but in many cases where it took root 2 millennia ago. These Christian families, they want to stay in the ancient lands of their birth, but too often they have to make the difficult decision to leave as a result of harassment or violent threats by extremists. As many thoughtful Muslims and Jews will tell us, this isn't good for the region. Christians are indigenous to the Middle East. They are longer than the Islamic community. They contribute to the common good of their societies, and their presence enriches diversity and tolerance, and beyond tolerance, respect. Their presence is so good for everybody, all the people of the Mideast. Something tells me this will be a major theme of the Holy Father's courageous visit to Lebanon this very weekend, a visit that all of us need to keep high in our prayers. The epicenter of violence against Christians might be the Middle East, but it's not confined there. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom reports that in Vietnam last year, quote, There were marked increases in arrests, detentions, and harassment of groups and individuals viewed as hostile to the Communist Party, including violence aimed at peaceful ethnic minority gatherings and Catholics protesting land confiscations and harassment. Father Niguez van Lee, a Catholic priest engaged in human rights work, was returned to prison after being given a 1-year medical parole. Although, thank God, there have been no large-scale violence since 28 in India, intimidation, the report goes on, intimidation, harassment, and occasional small-scale violence against members of religious minority group continues, particularly against Christians in states with anti-conversion laws. Prejudice I saw personally in my CRS-sponsored visit to Orissa, India. In China, the report quotes, religious freedom conditions for Tibetan Buddhists and Uyghur Muslims remain particularly acute as the government broadens its efforts to discredit and imprison religious leaders, control the selection of clergy, ban religious gatherings, and control the distribution of religious literature. The Chinese government has also detained hundreds of Protestants in the past year and stepped up efforts to shutter illegal meeting points and public worship activities. Dozens of unregistered Catholic clergy remain in detention or have simply disappeared. We're all soberly aware of China's decades-old harassment of Catholics, a topic I would hope Secretary Clinton raised in her visit there last week. Our gathering this afternoon draws on the experience of the Catholic Church in Cuba, Iraq, and Nigeria, but the lessons we will glean from these situations, they have broader application for people of various religions in a host of other countries. Sadly, religious intolerance and persecution are, I'm afraid, equal opportunity crimes against the entire human family. Not every attack on people of faith is motivated solely or principally on their religion. We know that. There are often other political and economic factors, but too often religious identity is the major reason. All religious traditions experience religious discrimination and violence, especially when they're the minority of a population. Baha'is, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, and others all experience marginalization and persecution. But our experience as Catholics and Christians is especially timely and pressing. Pope Benedict XVI makes an observation that's clearly validated by objective studies. Listen, at present, Christians are the religious group which suffers most from persecution on account of its faith. Many Christians experience daily affronts and often live in fear because of their pursuit of truth, their faith in Jesus Christ, and their heartfelt plea for respect for religious freedom. This situation is unacceptable, the Holy Father says, since it represents an insult to God and to human dignity. Furthermore, it's a threat to security and peace and an obstacle to the achievement of authentic and integral human development. This animosity against Christians is so rampant that it now has a name, Christophobia. As Catholics, it's our faith in Jesus Christ and the truth of the human person that drives us to defend the religious rights of all communities, traditions. This is a belief in the Imago Dei, central to Judeo-Christian revelation, cherished by other creeds as well, that every human person is created in God's image and likeness, deserving dignity and respect. Our faith in the Creator, in whose image we are made, is both personal and social. It finds expression in both freedom of religion and conscience, and in the freedom of believers to act together in the public arena, establishing not only temples, synagogues, mosques, and churches, but also faith-based institutions to serve the common good through educational, social, and medical services, and participating actively in public conversations to form societies more respectful of human life and dignity. Perhaps in part because of this engagement with society and culture, Christians are frequently targets of prejudice and threats of violence. As the president of the Conference of Bishops, it's too often been my sad duty to write letters of condolence and solidarity to church leaders throughout the world whose people have been attacked for their faith in Christ. Cardinal Kurt Koch, president of the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity, not long ago delivered a profound reflection on Christian unity and love of the poor, in which he said, God takes sides. In a world dominated by injustice, suffering, and poverty, the love of God for justice takes the concrete form of preference for the poor and the suffering. Cardinal Koch went on to speak of an ecumenism of martyrs, proposing that the shared Christian experience of martyrdom today, which crosses denominational boundaries, promotes Christian amity and unites Christianity in publicly denouncing the situations of martyrdom and committing ourselves in favor of respect for religious liberty and human dignity. Suffering unites. I believe this ecumenism of the martyrs does something else as well. It serves not only Christian unity, but the oneness of the entire human family. The suffering of Christians in many countries around the world is but a warning sign that the religious freedom and fundamental human rights of all peoples are at risk. The blood of martyrs is a cardinal red signal warning that persecution and intolerance is now, I'm afraid, epidemic. Pope Benedict reminds us that the denial of religious freedom is a threat to security and peace and an obstacle to the achievement of authentic and integral human development. Religious freedom is a value in its own right because it then frees up individuals and communities to pursue ultimate truth. For Christians, this, of course, is found in the person of Jesus Christ. At the same time, religious freedom is related to other essential human rights, including speech, association, and assembly. It's no accident that efforts to promote religious freedom have accompanied efforts to develop democratic institutions. The history of our own beloved United States of America attests to this fact. Pope Benedict XVI again. When religious freedom is acknowledged, the dignity of the human person is respected at its root, and the ethos and institutions of people are strengthened. Religious freedom, as the foundational first and most cherished freedom, contributes in a profound way to peace, justice, the rule of law, and the development of democracy. This reality is powerfully symbolized by two leaders who were tragically assassinated within 2 months of each other in Pakistan last year, remember? Shahbaz Bhatti, a Catholic, and Salman Taseer, a Muslim, were the Pakistani Federal Minister of Minority Affairs and the Governor of Punjab province, respectively. Both were assassinated for their opposition to the vicious Pakistani blasphemy laws that have been used to abuse the rights of Christians and other minorities. Shahbaz Bhatti, whom my friend John Allen urges be immediately canonized by the Church as a martyr, had visited the staff of our Conference of Bishops across the street on more than one occasion. And I'm told by those who were privileged to meet this saint that he was a man of uncommon courage and conviction, keenly aware of the threats to his life resulting from his human rights work. His brother tells us that on his nightstand, the only possession he found after his death were his Bible, the Catechism, and his rosary. The community of nations owes a debt of gratitude to all the martyrs for religious freedom. Their sufferings have sounded the alarm for the entire human family. St. Paul writes of the church, if one part of the body suffers, all the parts suffer with it. If one part's honored, all share its joy. The suffering of today's persecuted martyrs hurts the entire body of humanity. Widespread persecution today calls us to action, my friends, on behalf of the entire human family. Our Conference of Bishops and so many other religious bodies in our nation are well placed and well equipped to take up this sacred task. As citizens of a powerful democracy, we have a special responsibility to promote the religious freedom of our brothers and sisters in all nations and of all religious tradition. Many Catholic bishops' conferences around the world have looked to our own conference to bring before our government the distressing difficulties they're facing. In some places, Catholics suffer outright persecution. In others, they face discrimination in education, employment, and access to public services. Some countries prohibit public and even private worship. Others restrict being able to live the faith by providing educational, health, and social services to the broader population. And still others curtail participation in the public square. For decades, our Committee on International Justice and Peace has brought these concerns to Congress and various U.S. administrations. We've insisted that our public officials urge other governments to uphold human rights and to protect the religious freedom of all citizens. Our Conference of Bishops was instrumental in the successful passage of the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. This legislation, you might recall, sought to make religious freedom a central feature of United States foreign policy. And just last year, our conference vigorously and successfully advocated for the reauthorization of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, a key institution established by the Act. As a matter of fact, 4 Catholic bishops have served on this commission: Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, Archbishop Charles Chaput, Bishop William Murphy, and Bishop Ricardo Ramirez, 3 of whom are with us today. Public advocacy alone, they'll tell us, is not enough. Our conference directly assists victims of religious persecution, both overseas and here at home. I'm particularly proud of how Catholic Relief Services reaches out to people of all faiths who suffer. Their mission is to assist people, quote, on the basis of need, not creed. Here at home, our conference's Migration and Refugee Services and its diocesan network resettle people of all faiths who have fled for their lives. Through various national collections and other initiatives, we also provide direct assistance to the suffering church in far-off places. So you see, our Conference of Bishops does not keep its distance when it comes to international religious freedom. Bishops of our conferences make regular fraternal visits overseas to give visible support to the church in challenging situations. These visits put a face on the issue and give additional credibility to our witness with public officials and the American public. But our nation and our world are not where we need to be in terms of protecting and promoting religious freedom in so many places where it's threatened. U.S. policymakers need to place greater priority on religious freedom in foreign policy discussions and decisions, an observation cogently made to us bishops at our summer meeting in Atlanta by Dr. Thomas Farr, who's with us this afternoon. Americans generally, and our Catholic people especially, must become better informed of the systematic, consistent, unrelenting challenges to the fundamental right of religious freedom in far too many countries. The first freedom, which we too often take for granted here in our own nation, even as we are vigilant in its defense, is under often violent attack in other nations with terrible human consequences. The urgent task, this urgent task we consider this afternoon, is nothing less than a test of our shared humanity, our shared faith as children of God. It's also an imperative for peace and the common good of the whole human family. And that's why I conclude by saying it is indeed good for us to be here. Thank you. Thank you.